is our 8th Biosafety Now Twitter space, and the second space focused on raccoon dogs. Of course, that is a very interesting topic to discuss with the recent Jesse Bloom paper that came out. So my name is Bryce Nichols. I'm a professor of genetics at Rutgers University and one of the co-founders of Biosafety Now, which is a new nonprofit organization. We just started in early February this year, so we're not even 3 months old yet, which is kind of surprising. Seems like it's been about 10 years that we've had. So our mission is to draw attention to the constant threat of research-generated pandemics through education and advocacy, working with communities who have mobilized to protect themselves and the future of humanity from the threat of research-generated pandemics. We're fighting for comprehensive, legally binding, national and international level oversight to eliminate the risk to the public of research that creates new, non-natural, potential pandemic pathogens. I invite everyone to check out our website at biosafetynow.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter. I'd note that we're funded through donations, which can be made through our website. And starting actually yesterday, we also launched an online store, which you can find at biosafetynowshop.org, and proceeds from all sales of that store will go towards our mission of stopping the next lab-generated pandemic before it occurs. So I'm going to welcome tonight. Oh, good, Dave, you're now speaking. Okay.
Yeah, I think I had to switch to mobile to be able to make it work, I guess. That's okay.
Oh, yes, yeah. You got to use your phone. That's the key. So I'm going to just quickly going to introduce everybody we have on our panel tonight. So we're honored to have 2 returning journalists on our panel. First, Michael Balter. His journalism career began in the 70s, started at Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles. In the 80s, he moved to Paris, working as a travel writer, and eventually the Paris correspondent for Science Magazine, as we were found out 30 years before you moved back to the U.S. in 2017. You've taught general science journalism at BU, NYU, City College, New York. You run the CK newsletter and Words to the Wise on, that's your Substack, right? Which everyone should subscribe to, correct?
It's correct that it's my Substack, and it's correct that everybody should subscribe. Yes to both things.
So the other journalist we have tonight, welcoming back Emily Kopp, who's an investigative reporter with U.S. Right to Know. Previously, tongue-tied. She led COVID-19 coverage at CQ Roll Call, reported on the pharmaceutical industry for Kaiser Health News, specializing in the industry's efforts to shape policy in Washington. She graduated from the University of Georgia with degrees in, I should say, summa cum laude, with degrees in journalism, international affairs, and economics. And I, of course, need to mention that Georgia, of course, is a 2-time defending national football champions. Emily, are you actually a football fan, or is that not anything of note for you?
Not lately, because my world is entirely this.
That is true. It is hard to care about football, I guess, when the world seems to be so filled with so many bad actors. I agree, but
yeah,
nevertheless,
but go Dogs and all that.
Right, go Dogs. Okay. Also, Dave Bahry has joined us. We're honored to welcome him for the first time. He just completed his master's degree at Carleton University in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, on the mathematical evolutionary theory of aging. He's written 2 important articles related to COVID origins. I would say the first being, I got to flip my paper over here. So in August,
one preprint and one peer-reviewed paper.
No. We consider preprint papers. That's the deal.
Oh no, I disclaim, but yes, I agree. I agree that my preprint was important.
Very important. So yes, I was going to say you published a preprint titled "Circular Arguments on the Origins of SARS-CoV-2." In August of 2022 was when that came out, and that was where you critiqued the logic used by Warbley and Carr in their 2 science papers that came out earlier that year that concluded that SARS-CoV-2 emerged from wildlife sold in the Hunan seafood market. And then more recently, you had an article come out in MBio called Rational Discourse on Virology and Pandemics, which was your response to a infamous letter signed by 156 virologists published months earlier, which was titled A Call for Rational Discourse on the discussions of the origins So I like all this rational discourse letters, of course, very, very polite, civil. I'm also joined tonight by Justin Kenny, who is another co-founder of Biosafety Now,
Hey,
and
Bruce.
associate professor in the Simon Center for Quantitative Biology at Cold Spring Harbor. And now also we welcome Dana Parrish, who I just invited to speak, who's another member of the leadership team, who's an author, health reporter, singer, award-winning songwriter, and member of the advisory board of the Bay Area Lyme Foundation. Welcome, Dana, when you start to speak. Oh, there you are. Okay. And so I am now, because we have there's so many people and so many things to get to, I'm going to now turn it over to Justin.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by reviewing why we're having this Twitter space, how we got here. So this Twitter space was prompted by a preprint that Jesse Bloom, a professor at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Institute, posted, I believe it was Thursday last week, reanalyzing some samples from the Hunan seafood market that had previously been reported by a uh, collaboration of virologists to a Western virologist to show that, or to at least strongly indicate, or whatever kind of weasel word terminology you want to use, that a raccoon dog had started the COVID-19 pandemic. So, but I'll review how we got here first. So, on Thursday, March 16th, the Atlantic and New York Times published art. So the Atlantic published an article titled "The Strongest Evidence Yet That an Animal Started the Pandemic," and the New York Times the same day published an article, "New Data Links Pandemic's Origins to Raccoon Dogs at Wuhan Market." So a slew of similar stories in other media outlets soon followed, many strongly suggesting that solid scientific evidence had been uncovered that the COVID-19 pandemic was started by an animal at the Hunan seafood market in Wuhan, China. Specifically, that was started by a raccoon dog. It wasn't actually until the following Monday, March 20th, that Alexander Kristoff and colleagues posted a preprint describing the research featured in these media reports. So Kristoff et al. Reported that Kristoff et al. Reported an analysis of 73 genetic samples collected by the China CDC at the Hunan seafood market after the market was shut down in early 2020. All of these 73 samples contain genetic material for SARS-CoV-2. However, Kristoff et al. Focused on one of these samples, a sample called Q61, because that one sample had a high prevalence of genetic material from raccoon dogs, a species that had previously been shown experimentally to be capable of being infected with SARS-CoV-2 and of shedding enough SARS-CoV-2 virus to infect other animals. Now, before their preprint was posted, some of the authors of Kristoff et al. Went on a remarkably effective media blitz. So in their media interviews, these authors argued that sample Q61 was evidence that a raccoon dog had started the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, in her interview with The Atlantic, Angela Rasmussen said, quote, this is a really strong indication that animals at the market were infected. There's really no other explanation that makes sense, end quote. The preprint released.
I want to say I'll add a complaint about that article, not by one of the Chris Christoph et al., but by one of their someone else who's broadly pro market. Tried to even claim that this was stronger evidence than we had for SARS coming from a market, which was ridiculous.
Yeah.
That was Gigi Grundel said that.
Yeah. So there are a lot of really over the top quotes in these media articles. So it was frustrating at first because there was no preprint to really, for us scientists to read and see if we actually agreed with the evidence support those claims. But then the preprint later came out, and the preprint itself said, quote, the co-occurrence of SARS-CoV-2 virus and susceptible animal RNA or DNA in the same samples from a specific section of the Hunan seafood market, and often at greater abundance than human genetic material, identifies these species, particularly the common raccoon dog, as the most likely conduits for the emergence of SARS-CoV-2 in late 2019. Okay. Now, many scientists at the time that the Christoph preprint was released were skeptical of these claims. For instance, on March 20th, Biosafety Now issued a press release stating that the data provided no substantive new information about the origins of COVID-19, even if taken at face value. That there's no evidence in the data that the raccoon dog in sample Q61 started the COVID-19 pandemic, or even that this raccoon dog was infected with SARS-CoV-2. And the reason is that the viral material in that sample could just as easily have come from an infected human. There's another sign. So Jesse Bloom, who I mentioned, also expressed skepticism on Twitter at the time. So now we come to last week. Last Thursday, on April 26th, Jesse Bloom posted a preprint describing his own analysis of the samples collected by the China CDC at the Hunan seafood market. Unlike the Christoph et al. Preprint, Bloom analyzed all of the samples the China CDC had collected. Bloom analyzed how much genetic material there was in the samples from non-mammalian animals like fowl and fish, including as well as mammalian animals. And unlike the Christoph et al. Preprint, Bloom et al. Bloom reported how much genetic material from SARS-CoV-2 itself was in each sample. So, what's the takeaway? Well, it's interesting. The technical results that Bloom reports appear to be fully consistent with the technical results that Christoph et al. Report. So, on the technical side, there really doesn't seem to be any inconsistencies in these studies. However, Bloom's analysis is much more comprehensive, and Bloom's interpretation is very, very different. So, in short, what Bloom found was that there's actually a negative correlation between the amount of raccoon dog DNA in the samples collected and the amount of SARS-CoV-2 virus. Moreover, in the Q61 sample that Christoph et al. Focused so intently on, there was only one molecule of SARS-CoV-2 genetic material out of a total of 200 million molecules in that sample. For any of the scientists who work on DNA sequencing data, that's a red flag. like just one molecule. Anyway, that would have been good to know at the time. Bloom concludes that the amount of genetic material in the Hunan seafood market samples simply cannot shed light on which animals, if any, might have been infected with SARS-CoV-2. So I just want to conclude this intro by pointing out just how remarkable Jesse Bloom is as a scientist.
Yep, absolutely.
So he single-handedly, in a month, wrote a computational pipeline, analyzed three petabytes of data?
Terabytes.
3 terabytes, sorry, 3 terabytes of data. Yeah, right. 3 terabytes of data. Wrote a 13-page manuscript that's like remarkably well written, remarkably well referenced. He's the only author on this manuscript. And at the same time, he ran the Pathogens Project meeting in Geneva. So that level of productivity is just remarkable. And I should say, all of his computational analysis is the pipeline and interactive plots showing the results are all available online on GitHub for anyone to check out and to play with as they see fit. So his analysis is also very transparent. Um, so I should just say that I'm just super, super impressed by this analysis by Bloom. For someone doing the things he's doing to do this single-handedly is just absolutely remarkable.
Justin, can I echo that too? And I also want to point out we did invite Jesse to participate tonight. He was out of town. I think he actually would have participated. I can't say enough about how exceptional a scientist Jesse Bloom is. That's I mean,
really talented, really hardworking, really
Yeah.
intelligent. He's one of the heroes of the 2020s.
I guess I do want to say though, what I think unfortunately the problem in the COVID origin space is that it is one of these issues that's not uniquely a science-driven issue, and
Yes.
so Jesse is he is approaching this from a scientific perspective, and so if when I have been critical publicly about Jesse, it has been related to it's not at all related to science at all. He is one of the superstars out there, and his science and his credibility in that is unimpeachable. So I just want to throw that in there too to echo.
It's basically you just have a disagreement with him about the degree to which we should or shouldn't try to point fingers at people we think have been bad actors versus just correcting the science.
No, it's well beyond that. That's a very much
okay.
part of it. Actually, it's about the involvement of who gets to decide where we go when we talk about regulating research, and the whole
like disagreement on legislation versus whatever.
Well, who decides? So
Yeah,
I think that like Jesse's a scientist, right?
Yeah.
I'm a scientist. Justin's a scientist.
Yeah.
We have this issue. We have one issue where we think we're really smart about everything. You've seen this, right?
Okay, true.
And so that causes problems when you kind of get a little bit out of your lane, and that's where But that's I don't want to talk about.
Okay, yeah, we could go back to the.
So actually, I wanted to open it up for questions about the actual science. But before I do that, I just wanted to run it by Dave. Do you agree with my take? Do you have any additional comments to make?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. I'm trying to remember. I think there was some extra things I was thinking of adding. I'm trying to remember what they were. One of the, for anyone listening who hasn't read Jesse Bloom's preprint, one of the interesting things is that he's basically he's basically reverse engineering a figure that, so the data all this is based on is from China CDC went to the Huanan market and took the samples. And we've had a preprint from them since a year ago, more recently an updated preprint, then finally their China CDC's paper was accepted by Nature. And that's it's already out in a pre-edited version, it's gonna come out later. The original preprint by the Chinese CDC, they said that that there wasn't a correlation between any plausible animals' DNA and SARS-CoV-2 RNA, but they didn't give a lot of details. They gave one figure that showed that human DNA was correlated and most other DNA wasn't. But most of those data points weren't labeled, and a couple of them looked like they were correlated, but we didn't know what species those were. So that was, I think, figure 4 of what we used to call Gao et al. 2022. I say used to because there was actually an ambiguity in the order of authors, so maybe really it's Liu et al. 2022, but that's okay. So they said, wildlife DNA is not correlated with SARS-CoV-2 DNA or RNA, but they didn't give us a lot to work with. Then finally, when the revised preprint came out, they gave us the data, but they didn't have that figure anymore. So Jesse Bloom basically used the new data to reverse engineer figures analogous to that figure from the year-old paper. or the year-old preprint. So that's an extra really cool thing that he did. He figured out what they meant, what they were saying, how to get basically the same kind. Like the graphs aren't exactly the same because there's still not completely enough data to make it exactly identical, or not enough data, but like they didn't describe the methods completely exactly enough. But so that's an extra thing. It's interesting that the China CDC also, I think, so yeah, the original paper said that they couldn't find that animal DNA wasn't correlated, but there were a couple data points that looked like it was correlated, but now it turns out that was probably just like livestock and fish, which and the livestock meat is like just meat, right? Not live animals, I think, or that's the general assumption. Yeah, so like so it's like, okay, fish DNA is correlated with SARS-CoV-2. That's probably not, anything, and so on. Was it? So it turns so when we had this graph without a lot of labels on it, people like Chris Christoph and Warby and those used to say, well, what if maybe this is raccoon dog or something and it's just not labeled? Now it turns out it's probably just fish or beef or something. What else was I going to say? Oh yeah, when Chris, even before Bloom's thing came out and the Chris Christoph thing came out, we were mentioning how the data is compatible, but the interpretations are very different. Even without Bloom's reanalysis, the claims that were made about the preprint by them and by headlines were ridiculous because basically they found okay, basically they found that animal product stalls have animal DNA from those animals. That's basically all that their data actually found. Like when a beef stall had cow DNA, fish stalls had fish DNA. Wow, whoop-de-doo. Raccoon dog stall has raccoon dog DNA. Oh my god, that is, and even the claim of, well, this stall had SARS-CoV-2 and raccoon dog, but no human DNA. At first, that might sound impressive until you realize that in the East Wing, a beef stall had only cow DNA and raccoon dog DNA. Oh, sorry, only cow and SARS-CoV-2 genetic material, no human stuff. And so unless we think that's evidence, if you think that the raccoon dog stall was evidence of raccoon dog spillover, then you'd have to think that the beef stall was evidence that a cow or a steak caused COVID, which it obviously didn't. So basically, so their data showed nothing. Even based only on their own data, the claims that they made about it, that some of them publicly made about it, the claims that all of them hoped we would take away from it, the claims that the headlines, the Atlantic, New York Times made about it, was completely ridiculous. There was never any basis for that whatsoever.
Like at the time, the Chris Christoph et al. Preprint, the claims were just really overreaching. The articles were even more overreaching. And one great thing about Bloom's preprint is that it makes perfect sense. And his basic conclusion is these samples just don't tell us how the pandemic started. That's the conclusion. So I'd like to.
I could also, if possible, I can also add some more background about, because even before Chris Christoph, they were already talking about raccoon dogs. Should I say anything about that now? I can. I don't have
to. Turn it over to Emily and Michael,
sure.
They've got to go before too long. So
okay.
So let's see, Emily. It would be good to hear from you. So,
actually, before I get asked questions, could I ask a question? I'm more used to asking them. So I actually wanted to ask you guys, was there an intentional omission of information about the SARS-CoV-2 content of the samples? Because I noticed, Justin, that you sort of made the claim on Twitter that this was deliberate.
That was,
and so
that's exactly my first question too.
So I mean, and I'm curious, is it possible that they just didn't have a complete set of data? Because I know that they were just working with the positive samples. Is that the reason they couldn't reproduce the original analysis that David was talking about, or was there?
So, my personal opinion is yes, they concealed that result. So the thing is, the Chris Christoph et al. Preprint, like the whole preprint is about the relative abundance of mammalian genetic material in these samples. So, of course, you're going to look at the abundance of the virus itself as well to do the analysis. But they go out of their way, it seems to me, to not talk about the actual amount of virus in these samples. And my understanding from Jesse Bloom's results is that sample Q61 that Christoph et al. Focus on had the least amount of SARS-CoV-2 genetic material in it than any of the 72 other samples that they analyzed.
Oh, wow.
That would have been important information to know. Well, the thing is, all the samples had SARS-CoV-2 genetic material, and sample Q61 has only one molecule. You can't get less than that. And from Jesse Bloom's analysis, Q61 was the only sample with exactly one molecule. So that's highly relevant information. And I think there's no way that they didn't know that, right? When they got these samples, they're going to they mapped it to like the mitochondrial genomes of a lot of different mammals, but of course they're going to map it to the SARS-CoV-2 genome.
Justin, hold on. I think what you're saying is that you either have to say they're completely incompetent or there was intent. That's the problem.
Okay.
So you can't
either
say
a striking omission in their analysis, or they chose not to report this fact, and I think it's probably the latter. Now, I should say, in the Christoph et al. Preprint, they actually oddly make excuses for not like doing computing the sort of correlations that Jesse Bloom computes. So they actually say in their preprint, quote, it would be tempting to pursue a correlational epidemiological analysis between the presence of animal genetic material and SARS-CoV-2 positivity using data from market samples that tested negative for the virus when they became available. However, this approach is complicated by several factors. Oh, sorry. So, they're actually describing something a little bit different there. But so the sort of correlation that Jesse Bloom does is an obvious thing to try. It's just so obvious, and I think if you're going to go on a worldwide media blitz, I don't know. It's just such relevant information, right?
Yeah,
I'd say,
that makes sense.
I'll give my answer to this. So I didn't have a predetermined answer of whether they omitted this on purpose or not. I think plausibly they did, but also so first I'll say I wouldn't put it past them. They have a track record of, I think, willfully omitting crucial information to push a narrative. From a year ago, when they were talking about, the southwest corner with the wildlife is a hotspot for positive samples, and there was no evidence that this was true. Basically, it was the southwest corner where most of the wildlife had been most heavily sampled by China CDC because they were looking for a wildlife spillover. That's what they assumed, so that's where they looked. So if you look at the map in the China CDC preprint, if you look at their own map in their published paper and pay attention to the various subtly colored negative cases, you can see that positive and negative stalls were both clustered in the southwest corner because that's where China CDC looked. We now also know that even among sampled stalls, the wildlife stalls were sampled much more heavily. But so in the paper itself a year ago, Warraby et al. Did acknowledge that most positive and negative stalls were in the southwest corner. But in their lay articles, they didn't talk about that. In Eddie Holmes, one of the senior authors of that paper and of the recent stuff, in an article called "The Ladley Theory is Dead," he just said most of the samples that turned out to be positive were in the southwest corner near wildlife. He did not say so did most of the ones that turned out to be negative, even though he knew that was true, and even though he knew that dramatically undermined the case for there being a hotspot.
Yeah,
And and the others didn't call him out on this. The others, kept repeating, "Oh, it's a hotspot! It's a hotspot! It's a hotspot!" So I do not trust the honesty of this general network of authors. Uh, I I would not put it past them to avoid doing an analysis if they could get away with it, because they didn't like the result that it would give. I can only speculate whether they tried the analysis themselves before deciding not to include it in the preprint. I have no idea. I could speculate. I won't even speculate. However, though, I will say that in this case, uh, Bloom's conclusion after doing the analysis kind of agrees with this is a bit of a stretch, what I'm saying right now, but like Bloom concludes this analysis really doesn't tell us anything anyway, so whatever. It definitely doesn't support raccoon dogs, but Bloom does say, like if it supports anything, it supports fish and livestock, and we all know that fish and livestock did not start the pandemic. So although I would not put it past them to avoid doing an analysis because if they could get away with it because they didn't like its conclusion, it also could be that their reasons really are right anyway, because even Bloom ends up agreeing that the analysis doesn't really tell us anything. Yes, I don't know. It's hard to say. I wouldn't put it past them, but also, in a sense, they might be right that the analysis is pointless. But it's worth going through, doing it, and seeing why it's pointless, at least.
So I want to just clarify one point. I kind of agree with Bloom that whether there's a correlation or not is meaningless. It just really provides no information about where the virus came from. So the thing though is that the negative correlation I think is something that you you know I'd be super surprised if Christoph and all did not observe that correlation.
Yeah.
Like it's just the sort of analysis they were doing. It would be just an obvious part of the analysis.
And they knew about the Gao et al. Figure. Surely they would have tried to see what it was.
And the result is so, and the the fact that Q61 has like the least amount of viral genetic material
is really funny.
It just so strikingly undermines the basic conclusion of the media, like the basic conclusion that they were trying to communicate.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But Justin, I guess, and Dave, I guess this is where a really, so Michael and Emily, are you, when you see this, and you see the New York Times cover this the way they did, I mean, I'm frankly just embarrassed for scientists that are out there trying, like, that this is what's presented to them as science. I don't know what your, I guess if you have other thoughts about the questions about the science, this is really an interesting point because this is just kind of stupid science. This really is like just such like horrific, like really bad science, but it's being put in the New York Times and discussed. So it just doesn't really reveal anything useful, but it's being put out to public as if it does. So I'm very curious. That's why this is an interesting intersection of science and journalism.
Well, yeah, I mean, our industry isn't exactly covering itself in glory here. The one thing I wanted to say about the correlation data is that, I mean, I saw because Elon changed the algorithm on Twitter, and so basically all of the hate tweets about me got pushed into my feed for a couple of weeks as all of this stuff was happening, and I saw people basically making fun of me for calling attention to that Gao figure and saying it kind of looks like the China CDC did a more sophisticated type of analysis of this data. And I mean, Western virologists ridiculing, these Chinese scientists for this figure. So I guess my problem is if you're going to, in some of the most prominent media organizations in the world, accuse China CDC of this, intriguing cover up, you should probably try to, directly rebut their findings. You should probably, have more to back up your claim than a single sample. So, and also, I mean, they agree with Bloom that you know information is not important, but I mean, so much of their quotes in the media were around the abundance of COVID as it commingled with the abundance of raccoon dog DNA. I mean, they didn't put it in terms of correlations, but um, the quote.
Yeah, it was definitely implied.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think this whole debacle is a cautionary tale in not running with the claims of two people who are under congressional investigation for misleading the public on this very topic. That is a bad idea. And
Sorry, which two?
that is Edward Holmes and Christian Anderson. They are under investigation
Oh, okay.
for misleading
Oh,
the
okay.
public in an earlier paper, The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2.
Okay.
If you're on this beat, you should know that. And we talked about this, I mean, 2 months ago now, but when you see those names, if you're on the COVID beat, you should be wary. But my colleagues have just been totally checked out. And you should be especially wary if you don't have any sort of data or analysis, preprint report, nothing to once over before you run with these claims. And so I have a really hard time wrapping my head around it. I think, honestly, I'm curious to hear what Michael says, but my sense is that my colleagues just want to move on from the COVID story and they don't want to face the fact that we have so much work to do still to uncover the origins. And the origins is an uncomfortable reminder that we can't move on from COVID yet. So.
Well, thanks for. I'll do a little segue here, Emily. Thank you for setting me up for. Hey, just a couple of observations, and I'm always um, the um, the optimist. When I think I just chastised somebody on Twitter either today or yesterday for claiming that what journalists do, whether it's at Science or the New York Times, is determined by some powerful forces on high, and that all the reporters are taking orders, from I don't know George Soros or somebody, in terms of what they should be writing and what they should be covering. And um, I assume that Emily would agree with me that that's really not exactly how it works. That there's kind of just as there's kind of an internal culture in science, there's an internal culture in journalism that can very, reporters don't have to be given orders on high in order to have certain biases. It's kind of built into the culture and built into the system of journalism in the United States, and especially the mainstream journalism, the legacy media like the New York Times or the Boston Globe or the Atlantic or Science and Nature and so forth, because those Science and Nature are legacy or mainstream science publications. But it's been really interesting because, and this is where my optimistic side comes in, and that is that uh, when the Bloom uh, preprint came out, I kind of waited. I knew I was going to do something on my Substack newsletter, Words for the Wise, just a little plug for it, but you can read it there. I did a fairly long commentary on the Bloom preprint, but I kind of waited at first to see what the mainstream media might do, and for at least 3 days, if I counted right, the only article was Sarah Knapton's article in the Daily Telegraph, which was good and kind of pointed out the contradictions, but was really quite short and didn't have a lot of detail. And I thought sure that maybe somebody else was going to do it, but I wasn't really expecting the New York Times to be. I thought maybe John Cohen at Science would feel compelled to do it. Um, I think that Ben Mueller, who's done some really horrible coverage from the very beginning of the pandemic, and who did horrible coverage of the raccoon dog. As a matter of fact, one of the worst. His article on the raccoon dog business was one of the worst that I've seen in the last 3 years. Um, he eventually, and I was a little bit surprised actually because I was expecting it to come sooner. Eventually, did do an article. Now, it was not a very good article, but it was clear that the New York Times felt compelled to do something about it. I alerted Cheryl Gay Stolberg, who's been doing the Washington side of the coverage. I think Jimmy Metzel also alerted her to the Bloom preprint. She talked to Ben, and they managed to, to realize that they had to do something about it. And if you look at Ben Mueller's story, so not just to go on, but just to say one thing about it, if you look at that story, um, it was a very grudging story um, that
That was exactly the word.
right. It was it was it was begrudging that they had to cover. You could almost kind of tell, oh my God, I've got to cover the story, and it's kind of really screwing up my narrative. But Ben made up for that by from the second paragraph. But basically, he was still in the lead of the article, not even to what we call the nut graphs yet. Was already uh, undercutting the findings, and he did quote Bloom um, to good effect, but then he also quoted a whole bunch of other people. But not saying that Bloom's analysis was wrong, just saying that we couldn't, um, conclude anything from the data and from the analysis, anything at all really about what a possible intermediate host might have been. But I think just the last thing I want to say is that if,
which is exactly what Bloom was saying in his preprint.
But the thing is that if you put it all in context, and this is just kind of my last point, if you put it all in context, um, what Bloom is being extremely careful in not in saying, okay, well, we can't tell anything about what happened in the market, but I think that that's a little too cautious and it's a little too conservative. The zoonosis people have been swearing up and down for ever since the Warby and Picard papers were published that they had, originally it was dispositive. The peer reviewers made them take that out of the science papers, but that they were pretty much talking, and certainly Rasmussen, as if they had the smoking gun for the market. Well, that for the last year almost or 9 months, that's been shot down. So now they have kind of their second shot at it. They get all this data from the Chinese and from Gao and the CDC, and they make a big deal out of it, and it turns out to be nothing. So the fact that the fact that there's a negative correlation with raccoon dog and a very positive correlation with fish, catfish, and largemouth bass, actually goes further in my mind than just saying that you can't say anything about it. What it says is that all of the claims that have been made have been undermined. And it's kind of like they've got to start over again. If they're going to prove zoonosis, they've really got to find an intermediate host that's infected with a virus that's very close to SARS-CoV-2, and they haven't done that yet, and they probably never will. So that's my comment for tonight.
The funniest outcome, this is not realistic at all, just it would be really funny if it turned out it was fish after all.
Well, I think the Chinese authorities have tested a lot of fish. If you've seen the viral videos, and
Yep, don't worry, I'm not actually saying that. It would just be so funny.
yeah, haven't found anything in catfish, so not holding my breath. But yeah, I mean, just to add on to what Michael was saying, I think there are a prominent group of Western virologists who have really married themselves to the wet market, and I don't think a natural origin requires it to have begun at the wet market. But that has been their very prominent, very aggressive stance for a long time, and it's challenging to walk that back. And honestly, I think that's why we saw such a, borderline vitriolic response to the China CDC paper, because it threatened that conclusion. And there's been a pattern, as David was saying, about these Western virologists basically using China CDC data and then ignoring what the Chinese scientists actually say about it, including, the fact that there were 600 vendors in the market, and they focused on particular vendors. And so there's very little that you can conclude about um, uh, data with that sort of sampling bias. And that was taken in January, February, and March when the virus was already spreading throughout the market. So, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. I also just wanted to add one other thing, which is I think there's a less appreciated deception going on with this whole media frenzy related to the fact that these Western virologists were telling the media that they think that China CDC is covering up a natural origin. Meanwhile, ignoring emails from GISAID saying, hey, Chinese scientists are worried about you scooping their data. You know, it seems like they were well aware that the reason the data disappeared is because of concerns about scooping, and yet they told the media and millions of people that it was because of political deception. And I'm not saying, it's definitely not related to political deception, but I think that was another layer of dishonesty there.
Well, there's major questions about why these Western virologists rushed an analysis so quickly to put it out with what they knew was incomplete data.
Well, but it's on the same.
And they knew that the data would come out once Gao was accepted. And they knew that it was in peer review and had been free.
And it was the same playbook as the year before. I mean, this is it's rinse and repeat with when the Gao preprint came out. I think I would really want to. So one point I want to make about this is, again, to just go back to the unique spot I think Jesse Bloom is occupying in the history when this is going to be told. Who else really could have done this? Who else could have forced the New York Times to cover this? I really think that
maybe David Relman, he's the other one up there with Bloom, Heroes of 2020.
Well, but Bloom is but remember though, also Bloom sits there on Twitter and calmly responds to people trying,
True.
He's
true. Yeah, he's more active on that.
It really is commendable what he's done here and in other, in prior events that have occurred as well. So I think he will, and again, I just who else, like you say, maybe Relman, maybe, but Bloom is really doing an incredible service for science in terms of being the one that's pushing back on this nonsense.
Yep.
And I know Emily, you see all it's like you're just yelling into the wind or whatever, because it's so easy. Nobody can follow all the misstatements that are said, the inconsistencies from here to there. But what people can do is they can say, "Oh, Jesse Bloom showed that wasn't right." That's all they can handle, I think. There's too many things that they're throwing out there that are egregious to even follow. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's really just a very sad story.
And I just want to add to what Bryce mentioned. Now, like a lot of scientists who are commenting on the origins of SARS-CoV-2 have not done any research on it. Like, Bryce and I don't work in this area. Jesse Bloom is a major exception. So he has actually done very, very important research on SARS-CoV-2 itself as well. So he has an incredible amount of credibility when discussing the origins, and I think that's also
right. The unimpeachable because they undermine.
He does really important mutational scan stuff where they mutate every amino acid in the spike protein to see what every mutation does, type of thing. Like, it's crazy.
I also just wanted to mention, lest we forget, I don't want this to be forgotten to COVID history. Two of the, prominent people behind the Raccoon dog report, Warby and Anderson, have both accused Bloom of, malfeasance, I guess, for analyzing sequences that were deleted by Chinese scientists, and basically accusing him of stolen valor. And I mean, you know, I don't think he was ever locked out of a database for disrespecting Chinese scientists, and he had um, so much class that he didn't point out that hypocrisy. But I think it's just worth noting. Um,
Yeah, that's really funny. I didn't think of that.
It adds to the pile of things. I think
The background for people listening, it was there was some data of some sequences that had been deleted from some or other database. I forget what. And then Bloom saw them mentioned in a paper, and he was able to like track them down in like a cloud storage or something, and then published to analyze them. And they turned out to be important sequences. Oh, and then I guess Anderson and Warby tried to stop him from publishing it, or said he shouldn't, or whatever.
do you so I guess do you want to Justin, do you want to see if I guess Giles, or is it Gills? Gills. I don't actually.
It's probably you.
I can't. I'm sorry. Or Valentine want to say something? I just noticed they're in the audience. I'll invite them to speak if they want to. They have to be on the phone. If they're not on the phone, unfortunately, it won't work. But I did invite them if they wanted to comment, because I know they've been active and obviously in this area.
Yeah, Valentine, if you want to join, let me know. So I did also, though, want to say that these Western virologists have been putting, I think, scientists in a very difficult position. It really goes against our nature.
I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna switch to listener for a bit, by the way, so I can charge my phone.
Okay. So it really goes against, most scientists' nature to accuse like their colleagues of wrongdoing, right? It's something that's taken very, very seriously in the scientific community, and it's considered almost unthinkable to just come out and say it. But these Western virologists, they've just been behaving so badly, like that. They've been going on these, and it's not just the science that they're putting out having logical gaps in it or jumping to unsupported conclusions. It's the media interviews that they do. They very aggressively, persuade, reporters and the public through their media interviews of their hypothesis that the SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 had a natural origin, and so it puts scientists who think their evidence is thin in a difficult position, because not only do you have to explain why their analysis is flawed, even if you do that, you know you, they've been going on these very aggressive media tours. And so, I really don't like having to come out and say that I think the scientists themselves are being dishonest. But I just don't see any other way to explain the pattern of behavior that I've seen and particularly the disconnect between what they're telling the world and what the science actually shows. And I think it's important to come out and for scientists to come out. And if they believe that these individuals are behaving badly, to say so, because the world is getting most of its information about the origins of SARS-CoV-2 from this very small group of people.
Also, wait, Justin, can we go back to Emily's point for a second? Emily, can you restate that? Like, what? How many scientists are under congressional investigation, and what have they been asked to provide, and what have they provided?
Yeah. So, I just got a notification about a hate tweet from a virologist. Anyway, um, so yeah, I mean, point being, we should look askance at the fact that a small clique has had so much media play, and that it seems to follow a very familiar and very cynical pattern where the headlines precede the real evidence. That was what tied up discussion of the origins of COVID for nearly all of 2020 into 2021 before the proximal origin emails were released. And I'm sure, the drastic folks on the call know that very well. They were the only ones talking about this because of the claims of people like Christian Anderson and Eddie Holmes. So yeah, it's very strange. And I just to add on to what Justin was saying, it's not just a matter of them sort of forcefully making their case, which I think is okay, but the um, intimidation of journalists who are not persuaded or who follow other paths or who follow other clues that don't point towards the wet market. That is what really upsets me. And I made a little note. So
Yeah.
Angela Rasmussen is obviously notorious for this. And she said in March, The Atlantic, as someone already said, this is really a strong indication that animals at the market were infected. There's really no other explanation that makes sense. A couple days ago, April 28, 2023, we never claimed to find infected animals. Same virologist. And in that same tweet, she calls a reporter a liar. It's part of a pattern. And
Yeah, and these virologists, they're so abusive on Twitter to reporters like Emily, um, and to other scientists like me. Like I've never had interactions with scientists like this.
But so I guess to your Emily, who the thing is to me that drives me nuts is that if scientists are actively under investigation by Congress, why is that? Why aren't other scientists concerned about that? That haven't documents been requested from certain scientists and they haven't provided them, or they stonewalled the Congress for providing them. I think that is. I don't quite get how that's now an outrage in the scientific community.
Yeah, absolutely. And, journalists who publish emails related to the proximal origin paper are by necessity branded as conspiracy theorists, even if they don't make any strong claims about those emails. Just bringing them into the public light is enough to subject you to ridicule. And I think those emails are, no matter what your stance on the origins of COVID, part of the historical record. That was the most impactful scientific article in any discipline in 2020. And historians are going to care about how that paper came together. Um, so, yeah.
So how do you see this playing out from here, Emily? I guess we lost Michael, but I'm wondering, do you see this Bloom preprint moving the needle? I kind of find it to be a, I don't know what, watershed or to me it's a very important thing to happen because it's an unimpeachable scientist publishing something that, as Michael had said, sort of knocks down this very, very, big story that was just, published by these virologists.
I don't know because, that New York Times reporter follows me, and I try to make apparent that, trusting people who have a history, a pattern of overstated claims, and not being transparent is a bad idea. It can subject you to embarrassment. And that's exactly what happened when the Bloom paper came out. The first impulse of a lot of the virologists involved was to blame the media. They are the ones who overstated it, not us. We never said that this was important. Um, and I don't know if they're hearing me. I guess a lot of reporters are either really dug in or just want to move on. But the stakes here are immense. Millions of people are dead. We can't just move on. So I don't know. I have no predictions. I'm sorry. No insight. I'm just as lost as you are, I think.
Well, but usually you're more optimistic. It seems like you're a little more pessimistic right now. That's what I'm hearing. A little more exasperation. I guess, is it because of the new Twitter algorithm? You're seeing more of the negativity, or I thought to me this was a step in the positive direction, frankly. But you don't see any movement of the needle that gives you encouragement.
I guess I'm just a little beaten down by the cynicism of these virologists who don't seem to find it necessary to respond to this, really demolishing certain aspects of their argument. And I don't like the cynicism of reporters who don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation with their editor that, hey, we got that story a month ago really wrong. We need to fix it. And I mean, like Michael said, there's only been one reporter who's put something together on this. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I guess you caught me on a cynical day, but it just seems so.
We did invite Sarah. I actually reached out to Sarah, and I hope that she'll join us at some point. I was, she was is very interesting. Her comments at the Pathogens Project meeting. I know that you were you asked to go to the Pathogens Project, Emily? Or?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, it's possible that an email got lost. I get lots of emails, but I don't think so.
I think we were obviously. I know that I don't know if they probably wouldn't have paid or anything, but still, it was very glaring omission, frankly, that you weren't on that stage. Um, I think that was a huge loss for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Others in our group have commented about that too, and I guess I'll just leave that. But that was a big.
I love to make the room uncomfortable and ask uncomfortable questions. So, um,
Well, no, but that's what that was supposed to be about.
But...
Well, that was supposed to be. I mean, I think the whole point is to have those uncomfortable conversations. I know that what's his name, Jonathan Latham, I think, was sort of injecting, and Matt Ridley as well. I'm not sure if others were sort of putting out some pretty uncomfortable topics, but in terms of having that journalism panel, and you on it would have sort of taken it to a different, plane or whatever. I think. But anyway. Dave, you're back, Dave. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm briefly back, but I might alternate back and forth because my phone's at 10%, and it doesn't have a headphone jack, so I have to use the same charging thing for my
Yeah, probably. Maybe.
Sorry?
Did you want to say something, Dave?
Just now I was going to say my kind of gut prediction for how things generally will go is that eventually the discourse will kind of be memory hold. The narrative will shift to something more nuanced, or either we'll find out definitive proof that yes it was lab, yes it was the market, or people will just give up looking for it. And the big powerful names who behaved badly will face no consequences and no loss of trust by the people who keep giving them jobs, even though overall society will trust less and less and less and less and less. But yeah, I don't think anyone's going to face consequences. I don't think anyone's going to admit, yes, we deliberately, pushed media spin.
Kevin wants to ask a question.
I was just going to ask. I think you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but so we have people like Eddie Holmes and Christian Anderson who are being, to my knowledge, just asked by Congress to turn over records. Why aren't they being subpoenaed? Why isn't Peter Daszak compelled to testify? Where's Ralph?
Can they be compelled? So I think, as far as I know, of the three people you've just named, are any of them American? Like, does America have the power to do that to them?
Well, I think
Eddie Holmes is at a district in Australia.
Yeah, Eddie Holmes is British and lives in Australia. Christian Anderson's
he's in
Danish.
California, so
okay, he's in California. Okay, true.
Yeah. I'll just
right.
At I've publicly reported this, but the select subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic has started transcribed interviews with folks with firsthand knowledge of how that paper came about.
Yeah.
Emily, can I follow up on that question?
Sure.
So one thing that has seemed like a glaring omission or a glaring, I just haven't heard of it happening, is has there been any effort by Congress to obtain records from EcoHealth Alliance Science or any of Xi Jinping's collaborators in the United States? Do you know?
Yes. The problem is getting the agencies to respond. And I think what's sort of shocking to me.
Well, there's the agencies, and then there's the individual. Like they could ask the Eco Health Alliance itself to turn over records, or they could ask Ralph Barrick at UNC to turn over lab notebooks.
Right.
You know, if there's been any effort to do that, like outside of government agencies.
Yes, yes, there have been many efforts. I think those efforts were productive last year when Democrats had the gavel because they didn't have any subpoena power. Those requests essentially didn't have any teeth, so they were actually really reliant on records being made public through FOIA, which is sort of mind blowing because you think Congress has a constitutional duty to provide oversight to many public institutions that were funding viral research at the WIV, and yet couldn't get documents better than the ones that we had. And I think since Republicans have gotten the gavel in the House, that's beginning to change. And I think um, they just have to build their case in a steady enough way and in a deliberate enough way. And it probably doesn't happen at a pace that makes me happy and makes people who have been waiting 3 years for this investigation happy. But you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of pushback from the biomedical community at large around investigating virologists. So I think they have to be really careful. So that's my best understanding of what's going on there.
Okay, thanks, Emily.
It does seem like there's very little support amongst academic scientists for investigations of scientists. However,
at least publicly, behind the scenes, we don't know, right? They might be working with folks.
I don't know. I mean, I guess just talking to my colleagues, I get a sense that it's this idea of it's a witch hunt, and it's Republicans' motives are always bad and questionable. So apparently, if you question someone's motives, you don't have to respond to requests for documents, even if those people were democratically elected by people. I think I guess it is shocking to me that scientists under investigation by Congress and sort of act normally within the scientific academic community. I think that's egregious, frankly, especially given the magnitude of what they're under investigation for. Yeah, seems like a somber Twitter space tonight. Geez, Dave, do you have any positive?
Well, about that, I was going to say people might, well, apart from just general, closing ranks, us against the Republicans thinking or whatever, there could be some amount of thinking innocent until proven guilty, like, okay, they're under investigation, that says nothing, let's wait till we see the answers. People, I don't know if that's people's real motivation, but it might be what they tell themselves.
No, but they're not handing over documents. That's the point.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like you can't.
Sure. Never mind. Yeah.
And this also goes to Emily just broke I think the story of the NIH finally handing over the documents that had been requested for over 6 months about monkeypox experiments going on at the NIH.
Well, not really. They just sorry.
They said
just to
they would.
clarify, they just told the committee that they weren't going to move forward with the experiment,
okay.
and I haven't been able to do in-depth reporting on this yet because I've been doing other things. But the sense that I got from the hearing was that that was a way to get out of answering questions that they had been ignoring for 6 months about the deliberative process around that experiment.
So they don't even have to provide documents. In fact, this is actually not good because you're saying that they're just telling them we didn't do this, we won't do this, and it's sort of taken at faith that that's true because it was very possible those experiments were already performed.
That's a good question. Yeah, I need to dig into this more. It's on my list of things to do, but I mean, my understanding is that NIH won't even tell GAO, the Congressional Independent Watchdog, who is on the P3CO. Why? I mean, it's absurd, right? why is that level of secrecy necessary for civilian viral research? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Kevin, you have another
Well, I was just going to add to that according to Rand Paul, he says that those agencies, whether it be NIH or USAID, will hand those documents over if Senator Bob Menendez signs the letter.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I know.
neither he nor any Senate Democrat has signed the letter. So, I mean, that's.
This is
I was on the left
Yeah.
for 20 years. I know we don't want to get this into a political thing.
Oh boy, here we go.
No.
Kevin.
I won't do it.
Here
I
we go.
promise I won't do it. I just want people to observe what is happening, and I think that there are
We know. Look, we're not happy. We're not happy.
there are some
You know.
psychological components, that precede rational and ethical analyses that people aren't taking into account, and they are correlated with people's hyperpartisanship. I'll leave it there. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. No, I know that, and of course, Bob Menendez is my senator, so that's especially annoying. Wonder. Well, this actually means I should probably meet with him if I could. I don't know if he'd meet with me, but yeah, it's disappointing. And I guess this is the time I announce my Senate campaign to take on Bob Menendez. You all ready?
There we go.
I should do it. What do you think? I don't think I would do that well, but regardless, I don't know. Does any questions? I'm sorry. It seems like we have a. Oh, I thought Yana had a question. No, it's just thumbs up. But does anybody have any other questions, or you want to say any final thoughts? Emily, Dave, Kevin, Justin. I feel like we need to give somebody something positive. I mean, there's the gift shop, the Biosafety Now gift shop, and I mean, come on.
I had been thinking to ask Mike something, but we lost him. Yeah, I know he has a Substack. I wanted to ask if he's tried to publish stuff with like legacy media, and they've said no, or just if he hasn't tried because he knows it's not worth it, or what. But he's not there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I mean, you especially given
in relation to that.
Sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah, or say what you were going to say. It might have been what I was about to say.
No, I'm saying because you just had an experience getting something that we were all shocked that you got into MBio.
Yeah, it was that. Yeah.
We're like, how
so
the hell did this happen?
Yeah, so it was. So he, Bryce is referring to my paper that came out because it took a year since Warby et al. Came out for me to get my critique of Warby et al. Out, and I got it out by having it be part of a critique of something else. So Warby et al. Were the ones a year ago saying, "Well, look, there's a hotspot for raccoon dog SARS-CoV-2 wildlife," and there was no evidence of that. And I did my preprint a year ago, and then so I proposed to Science submitting a technical comment critiquing it. Science said we're not doing any technical comments related to COVID. We're redirecting it all to e-letters, and e-letters basically are blog comments. Nobody cares about e-letters, So I didn't do that. I posted the preprint. I contacted the few journals, pitched it to them. No one said anything bad about the quality, but they were saying, "Oh, it doesn't fit our scope." One of them was like, "This is about a paper in Science. Should it be in Science?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know it should be, but whatever." And then finally, this other journal published their editorial, and I had a lot to criticize about that editorial. But also in that editorial, they cited the Warby et al. Paper, so that gave me a chance to finally include my criticism of Warby et al. In my criticism of this other paper. So it was like, very, very, it took a lot of navigating the system to finally be able to get something out. But the interesting thing is, sorry,
David,
sorry.
I'm actually really glad that you were able to publish that critique. And I think that there's been a number of, so-called, well, there have been a number of signed letters by lots of virologists, or by a few very well-known virologists, outlining their beliefs about the origins of SARS-CoV-2. And I have found all of them to be remarkably bad. And I think, it's important for people to hear dissenting arguments from, those. And, I've been reluctant myself to try to write one of these because I've, encountered in just past experiences how hard it is to go through the scientific publishing system and to counter something that has been published.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really hard.
Oh, so even with that, even when it's not something really controversial like this, basically, like the only chance you ever have to critique a paper is within 6 months of it being published. You can submit a critique to the same journal and maybe get that published. That's basically the only time it's possible to just critique a paper. Otherwise, I don't know, like other journals don't want to just critique this journal because that's not friendly. You don't want to just publish, like, they don't want to just publish a critique, I think, because, like, they like to feel constructive and, oh, aren't you just knocking something down? That's destructive. And no, it's always constructive to correct, falsehoods. But yeah, even without the controversy, it's already sorry.
And they don't want to publish criticisms of themselves. I mean, I had this
That too, yeah.
at science. I wrote a critique of a paper published in 2011. Again, I submitted as a technical comment, and they rejected it. And then that paper was later published in that technical comment expanded to a paper. It's published in PNAS, and it has over 500 citations.
But let me break.
Anyway, but so I'm going to add a bit more. I'm back to 3%, so soon I'm going to switch back to listener. But so what I was saying, so I finally got the thing out. But even before that, I'd pitch it to journal after journal after journal every so often when I had time and a bit of energy. I knew that I wasn't going to get accepted, but I kept pitching it anyway and so that was part of it. Basically, I knew that when I post my preprint, people who disagree with me are going to be like, well, why aren't you submitting it? It's good to be able to say I am submitting it because I want it on the record that I'm doing my part. It's the journals that aren't doing their part. Because I could just say, well, I know I won't get published anyway, so I'm not going to bother. And then people could try to answer. They'd be full of shit, but they could try to answer. Well, he is not even trying. If he was a real scientist, he'd be trying to publish. So it's kind of like the attempt to publish is part of it, even if it won't work. And then kind of like I'm deciding whether to use a very, very, very loose analogy, but it might be way too loose. But in fucking like international law or whatever, some other country tries to take your land, even if they have way bigger guns than you and they do take it. As long as you keep like raising your hand at the UN and saying we still don't consent to this, then like once you stop doing that, then kind of like that, then that actually gives them a legal right. This is probably not true, but like in general, the protest itself, even if it's ineffectual, does have, in international law, it has legal effects. Here it has, rhetorical effects or, sociological effects. Like, you at least get to say, I am doing my part. I am working with the system. If the system's not working with me, that's their fault, not mine. So even though I knew I wouldn't get published until finally an opportunity came up where I thought I had a chance, I was still doing it anyway so that I could say, I'm doing my part. I am working with the system because I am a scientist. So yeah, I forget how I got to that. It was kind of tangential to my. Oh yeah, it was tangential to what I was talking about. How I was going to ask Mike if he just tried to work with legacy media or not. Yeah, it was interesting knowing that I had no chance getting published for a while, but kind of explicitly deciding to try anyway for that reason.
Yeah, but it's good to get these arguments down on paper.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Dave, are you about to? I was going to say Emily has to go. I think. Emily, do you want to say anything? Last, we'll take a couple questions. If you can stay, Emily, or do you need to go? Or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I really should hop off. But this has been fantastic.
Thanks,
so
Emily.
thank you so much for the opportunity to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining, Emily.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Emily.
We're going to take a question. This is Alexander. So I'm a reporter for Yahoo News, and I've been working on this
on COVID origins from the start. And look, I like many people, I at first thought it was, xenophobic, xenophobic to even entertain the idea that it was a lab leak, and then gradually as evidence started to come out and a lack of evidence for market origins sort of persisted into 2021, it became clear that there really was an issue here. So I want to be very, I've read Jesse Bloom's preprint, and I've understood as much of it as I think as I can as a layman, and I just want to know, what is the most responsible way to paint his findings? I think probably our headline is going to be "The catfish started the coronavirus." I assume that's completely accurate. Um, but if it's not, no. But in all seriousness, what I thought the Times coverage of it was, and obviously because that reporter was named in Jesse's the preprint as sort of promulgating the raccoon dog theory, it seems sort of strange that that reporter was then writing about that preprint. But in any case, what is the most responsible way of articulating what Jesse found and didn't find? Thank you again for doing this.
I'd say in the context of previous reporting, the most accurate headline would be "Leading virologist finds no evidence raccoon dogs started the pandemic."
Right.
In the context of raccoon dogs being what everyone's thinking, you need to get the core message out clearly. And the core message is, right now, there is nothing to that theory. It's a wild shot in the dark based on zero.
I agree. So the core takeaway from Jesse Bloom's analysis is just that the content of those samples at the Hunan seafood market is just cannot reliably indicate whether any animals were infected with SARS-CoV-2. They just can't. And I think that's a very solid conclusion. I completely agree with it. And the implication is that there is no evidence, as had been previously reported, that a raccoon dog started the pandemic. Does that answer your question, Alexander, or do you have any follow-ups?
Yeah, I mean, my question is why Warby was Jesse was working with a somewhat more specific data set, right? But
so he was working with a more complete data set than Christoph et al.
And that's the Warby group, that the Atlantic.
Yeah, they're all the same group. Christoph, Warby, Holmes, all of them.
Yeah. So what happened was that they found the Warby group found some data just for the virus positive samples on GISAID, and then they did a quick analysis of those. What Jesse did is he took all of the data that had been posted by the China CDC after they published their paper in Nature, and he ran an analysis, and he confirms in his preprint that all of the analysis that was discussed in the raccoon dog preprint was like a subset of the data. So all the data that the Warby group analyzed, that was actually included in the data that he analyzed.
Right.
So he analyzed.
So he was confirming that they didn't have extra data that he didn't have. It was all part of the data that he had.
Right. So they were
and that we all now have access to.
They were looking through a keyhole while he was looking through a window, and they were looking at the same thing, but obviously he had the more broad vantage point.
So basically, they first of all they only looked at mammals, right? Or they only published data on mammals. They briefly mentioned fish. They only looked at they only included stalls that were positive, which means either they had any SARS-CoV-2 reads at all, or they had environmental PCR at all. I think they didn't look for how much, so they weren't doing a correlation analysis at all. They just said, okay, here's the positive stalls. Oh, look, that one has a lot of raccoon dogs. right?
So that means, so just
Yeah.
forgive me, but that means you would have to have wanted to reach the conclusion, and I think that allegation has been pretty clearly out there, that they clearly wanted to reach the conclusion that just the commingling of the viral RNA and the animal DNA said something definitive about origins, where in fact it just said that there were some animals and then there were some viral particles, which I don't think. I mean, the Chinese themselves have said that humans brought the virus to the market, right? So ironically, they are telling that part of it is probably true, right?
Yeah, well, so I think I think what you're saying is basically right. There's no okay, so Bloom does have a more complete set of data, and he does do a more complete analysis. That being said, he doesn't actually come to any technical conclusions that are different than Christoph et al. The primary difference, like if Christoph et al. Had run the analysis that Bloom ran, even though they only had the positive samples, they probably would have come to much the same conclusion. I'm guessing because I haven't run the analysis myself, but that's my impression from the Bloom et al. Preprint. The main difference is in the interpretation. Bloom says if you look at the correlation and abundance of virus genetic material and animal genetic material, it just you come to nonsensical conclusions. You like the strongest correlations are found with fish, not
Right.
with and raccoon dogs actually have a negative correlation. But fish are even more strongly correlated than with humans. Um, so, Jesse's conclusion is look, you really have to go out on a limb. He says this in his preprint. You really have to cherry pick your analysis parameters to get any correlation with um, COVID susceptible animals that comes out on top.
Um,
So I think that my it's really hard for me to have a generous take on this for the authors of Christoph et al. It's just hard for me to think of a plausible scenario in which they didn't realize that one sample they were so focused on had the least amount of viral genetic material
right.
of any of the samples they were looking at. That was incredibly relevant information, and they chose not to report it. And they actually even kind of tried to make excuses for not doing it.
It, and this is, I think, COVID origins has always also been a media story, right? Um, and it remains one. Um, my last question for you all, and thank you so much for doing this, is whether I can just have a recording um, of this just to review
Oh,
tomorrow.
it'll
If
be.
someone could,
This is being recorded, so as soon as this ends, it should be available right where in the post. It'll say play recording. If there's some technical issue, I'll be able to get it off the archive in a few days, and then it'll be posted on our website. So, but it definitely the light is recording now, so you should be good. Thanks
wonderful.
for
Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander, for your interest, and thank you very much for your interest in Dashens. I think that's awesome.
Thanks everyone.
Do you want to? I guess there's Valentine and we got Fousey in the house. So I don't know. You want to Valentine? You want to say something?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Good
Yes.
evening.
Yeah. Very
Hey,
good.
Valentine.
We
Hi.
also have Adrian there.
Very, very interesting space so far. So I was just wanted to comment on that susceptibility part. Actually, that only study where they ever measured or where they ever got raccoon dogs infected didn't use the original SARS-CoV-2 strain. They used one that already had a D614G mutation. And for example, in minks, it's known that this mutation is required to be able to infect minks with SARS-CoV-2. This or other enabling mutations. Yeah. So even that point, and that's also still there in Bloom's article, it has never been shown that raccoon dogs are susceptible for the original strains. And then the second point to that, they measured virus titers, yeah, and they're like 10,000 lower than in humans in raccoon dogs. Yeah, so they infected 9 raccoon dogs, put like 2 ml of viral supernatant into the nose, and then only 6 got infected by this like very intense measure, and those that got had like 10,000-fold lower levels. So if you assume that like a whatever some sputum from a raccoon dog and human has the same amount of DNA from the host, you'd expect to have 10,000-fold less viral RNA from a raccoon dog. So if you correct for these, it's basically even that cherry-pick sample says it's 20 times more likely the one viral read came from a human.
Valentin, the D614 mutation is that on the spike protein?
Yeah. D614G. It's I think it started like with the alpha variant fairly early, but it wasn't around at the market already. And it spread in Germany. Actually, it was a German study, and I quickly checked with the first author, and they didn't have the original virus. But I think, yeah, they should have clearly pointed this out as a limitation. They didn't thought much about that. They thought it's okay, we just take the virus we get. And once it reached Germany, it already had that mutation and was much more infectious. Yeah, but I think it's quite important to realize that also there was another study looked in wild raccoon dogs, and they never found any infected animals. So it's really, really questionable even from that perspective. That
Okay, that's good to know. So you're really highlighting the issue that it's not so clear which animals are susceptible to the level that humans are susceptible to, uh, if any, um, to SARS-CoV-2, right, Valentine?
Sorry, I muted his mic because there was some interference. I'm sorry, Valentine.
Okay.
You gotta unmute yourself. I'm sorry. There was static. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So we've found a lot of wild animals that are got infected, like cats and dogs and deer, and
Right.
we've never found a single raccoon dog. Yeah, and the mutation really helps to infect other animals. So I think without that, we just can't say. Yeah, we just don't know if raccoon dogs are the original strain.
Yeah, so this highlights an important fact that why are we focusing on raccoon dogs in the first place? As far as I can tell, like there's nothing in the Hunan seafood market samples that singles out raccoon dogs as opposed to other possible species. It seems that the focus on raccoon dogs is primarily because of that study and kind of ridiculously that Eddie Holmes happened to snap a photo of a raccoon dog in 2014, right at the Hunan seafood market, and it's actually like that damn photo is actually in the Warby et al. Science paper.
That's embarrassing. That's actually one of the most embarrassing things about this. I want to say, first of all, Valentine, it's like probably like 4 in the morning where you are. Thanks for chiming in. Can we go to Fousey? Because I got to tell you, Fousey's been all over the frozen fish aspect of this. He must be very excited that it is a fish.
Well, I think Justin just hit on the nail on the head. Basically, why are we even talking about this raccoon dog? Just because Holmes sent a picture of 2014. It's a whole nothing burger. Why are we talking about it? Why is the media making such big issue out of nothing? and the data from the market suffers from deep sampling bias. So it's nothing. I don't know why are we even talking, wasting our energy. I know it's such a big media story, and I hope someone like Alexander, I mean, asking why your fellow journalists writing up such misleading headlines 3 years into the pandemic. It's crazy. It's like, I don't know what to say. It's simply crazy. It defies all common sense and all the logic we can possibly imagine. I don't know. That's why I want to speak, with microphone on. It's simply crazy. We are wasting so much energy on this market stuff. Like I said, it's a flat Earth. You know, it defies common sense by all means. That's what I'm gonna say. Yeah.
It's
I need to give that flat Earth thing. That was actually Dana's comment that I posted for her. Like I don't want to take credit for that because that was Dana. That thing about the market is just like the flat Earth. That's definitely a Dana thing. That I do not want to take credit for that. But she gave me permission to post that.
Yes, it's ridiculous clickbait. Like,
So is that it, Susie? I mean, by the way, everything you said had 3 exclamation points. I must say.
Well, I
Sure.
think people should journalists like Alexander should go back to what AP reported probably 2.5 years ago,
Yeah.
which was that was a Chinese government document in black and white stating they want samples from the market to qualify as COVID infections. So that itself says all you need to know. Whatever sample was gathered from the market suffers from sampling bias. Period. So whatever they do, the Raccoon dogs, whatever, all the scientific analysis is great. It's already debunked. But we should focus at a higher level. Why
Yeah.
are we even talking about it, about the whole thing 3 years later, and no one's calling out the fake headlines, breaking news, the strongest evidence for market origin. I mean, am I crazy or everybody else accepting such headlines as if it's normal? It's not normal. I mean, that's
It's,
No,
yeah, there's
I agree
definitely
with
something
I
going
agree
on.
with you, Susie. It's crazy making. It's really gaslighting. Like it, and like you see these headlines worldwide, and you think like, wow, something that's having that big of an impact should be a serious story, and it's not. Right?
I said, like, yeah,
Completely ridiculous.
it's not normal journalism at all. It is it's quote unquote normal in the sense of expected, not in the sense of okay for like geopolitics, like 2000 2001 when the Bush administration's being like, oh my god, we definitely found the weapons of mass destruction this time, you guys. Like, this is normal in the same way that that's normal in that when geopolitics is involved, the media goes apeshit and believes whatever the right people tell them to. But it's not normal in the sense that normal people are normal.
Well, David, I think your analogy there is actually really apt. This is an analogy that has come to my mind a lot. Is that the um, the the story about the zoonosis? Like it reminds me a lot of the lead up to the war in Iraq. And one major reason is that in the lead up to the war in Iraq, reporters were relying on a pretty small number of and the intelligence agencies were relying on a pretty small number of unreliable sources,
Yep.
and that were, saying things that kind of, even at the time, were kind of known to be ridiculous, but
Yep.
it worked. And in this case, I don't know how much the media realized that there's this one coterie of virologists very aggressively pushing this one very specific narrative and doing it in scientifically very unethical ways.
I think the media knows, the readers don't know, and the media is trying to keep it like that. Like every time they say an international team of virologists, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like you don't already know who they are. Like every time it sounds like, wow, another international team, amazing, and it's just the same fucking guys again. Like
Well,
the same people famously who wrote Proximal Origin still doing their narrative, and yet instead of being like, remember them, they still think the same thing. Instead, they always say an international team of virologists, like it's new.
Hey, thank you so much, everyone, for doing this. I've got to put a 7-year-old to bed, but just so deeply appreciate you staying on this. It's in kind of bringing your hypotheses to the fore. I know it's not easy, so thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you again.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Alexander. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
But
Hey, so I guess is there anything? Maybe we should final thoughts and then wrap up. I didn't realize it's already 9:45. So
Yeah, I've got to put a 43-year-old to bed.
oh boy. But yeah, I want to thank everybody, and thank people that came up and contributed as well. I think unfortunately it seems like there's I don't know. It seems like maybe we weren't as optimistic as I thought we would be. I really think the Bloom thing is a can I say what is it, watershed moment or tentpole or what is it? It's a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I think historically it'll come back. It'll be the thing people can go back to because they're always asking, well, was there a science paper that was done for that? And as Dave Barry can say, he's like, yeah, I did this thing. And they're like, well, wait. It was Zenodo, and you're not a domain expert.
Yeah, and now we could say, no, it's American Society of Microbiology. Rasmussen can't go around anymore saying there's never been a peer-reviewed critique of our work. Now there has.
Yeah, it's a thing like where we have So these are very important things to get. People always want to have a paper that. So I think things are actually more positive than maybe.
Yeah, I have a measured amount of optimism. I don't think so pessimistically, I don't think the scientific establishment or the media establishment or the political establishment are going to learn their lessons. The next time there's a geopolitically fraught question, they're going to act exactly like they're acting now. Like they're not going to learn, they're not going to learn that public trust matters, and they will continue to go around with baseball bats trying to destroy public trust with their actions.
Dave, you're forgetting Biosafety Now.
True.
That's true.
That's true. Yeah, it's always good. I'm like, but yeah, for this particular question, I think I don't know. I wouldn't call it, or maybe watershed. Like it is turning. There have been turning points before. For the first year, we couldn't even talk about this without it being a conspiracy. But then the Bloom et al. Science letter came out, right? So gradually the narrative will be improved, and it'll be harder and harder. Now that we have the China CDC data and we have Bloom's analysis of it, it'll be harder to Warby and L's pushing their narrative was, to the degree they were, was partly because there wasn't enough data, so they could take this small, highly biased sample, act like it wasn't biased, do their bad analysis based on it, whatever. When we have good analysis based on fuller data, it's harder for them to do that. They're still going to try. Basically, I think things are turning, but gradually, and the powers that be will not learn their lesson. But I guess we'll just have to fight each battle over again each time it comes up for this issue and for the next issue. I think in general that's how I expect things to continue for the indefinite future. But I am glad that we are able to fight these battles and we are able to change. And I think we have been doing that.
Justin, you want to just say the final words, and I'll mute myself and end it when you're done?
Yeah, so I'd like to thank I'd like to thank David Barry for joining us, as well as Michael Balter and Emily Kopp. And that's it. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.